when the SaaStock team came to me and asked about that session, they basically offered me a kind of private office hours with 3 top VCs. I mean, I definitely couldn't refuse that. It was too good to be true. So today with me, I have 3 great VCs. Philippe from Accel, who's well known for all these SaaS investments he's done all over Europe and elsewhere. Indy is doing the same thing at Bain from the US. And Joss has the huge background of having been on both sides of the table. And I guess that experience is also going to be awesome. Joss is from Notion. I don't know if you could maybe present yourself like in a moment or two. Philippe, you want to start?
Sure. So very quickly, so I'm Philippe Botteri. I'm with Accel. I'm based in our London office. So Accel is a global firm. So we have offices in Silicon Valley, London, and India. And the core of what we do is Series A, B, or C, $5 to $20 million. And occasionally we can do $1 to $2 million seed. And we also have a growth fund which helps us invest up to 100 million. And we're big on SaaS.
Indy Guha, I'm with Bain Capital Ventures in San Francisco, also A, B, and C stage investors. In terms of why I'm here, I think we've had a lot of success with helping European founders cross the Atlantic and attack the US market, and hoping to get to know those of you who are looking at making that leap in the next 3, 6, or 9 months.
Hi everybody, my name is Joss White. I'm a partner at Notion Capital. Notion is a VC based in London. We invest across Europe, mainly at Series A stage. We have a strong focus on enterprise software, enterprise SaaS. So we're a team of entrepreneurs and operators, and our background is very much in SaaS. So I'm a kind of entrepreneur turned investor. I co-founded a business called Message Labs, which was a in the cloud antivirus, anti-spam provider in 2000. We took Message Apps to 500 people and about $150 million of ARR and sold it in 2008. And then we set up Notion. So I have experience on both sides, as Nicolas said.
All right. And so on my side, I'm the co-founder of Algolia. And the situation is that we just have recently raised our Series B, nice round. Disclaimer, we actually did that with Accel, and Philippe is on our board.
This is personal for you.
Exactly. Yeah. So I may try to not be too personal with my questions. We'll see. Maybe to start the panel, there is that question about, I guess before raising, as you are building your deck, I always had that question for myself about that slide, about how am I going to use the fund? It's always like kind of, I'm not sure I don't know exactly how to build that and be really relevant for them. How important is that slide for you when you are looking at the pitching deck?
For me, it's not very important. I'm much more interested in other things, particularly like the team. Can they scale? Does the company actually have a predictable, scalable go-to-market model that if you invest more into, you know what you're going to get out the other side? Are they operating in a big market? Customers generally happy, things like that. So I think that the use of proceeds slide is normally a bit of an afterthought that people don't give that much thought to. I'm more interested in the team and in the data, and is it a model that can really be scaled? Whereas it's pretty obvious, I think, where you're going to spend the money, and I'd rather leave that to the team.
Do you mind if I skip the slide next time?
No, I think you should. The only piece we use that slide for is really to see if the founder understands how far they will get on the capital and whether they'll hit the next set of milestones they need to, the inflection points in their business. And generally, kind of X million dollars for engineering, Y million for sales and marketing is not a useful way to think about that. So I'm not a big fan of that slide either.
I'd rather have you use the time to get one more customer.
Yeah.
That's a good answer. Okay, now I've got the funds. It's all good. It's time to double down, to invest. Where to do that, how to do that is basically the question. Should I go first after a new geo, after a new product, a new market? What's your experience? I don't know, maybe Indy from the US. It's like we're going to speak about Europe too, of course, but like you're a US startup, is that the right time maybe to go international?
It can be. I would say, in general, everything takes longer than founders or investors would like them to. And so one way to answer that question is, what do you want to be in full flight? 18 to 24 months from the time you're asking the question, and then sort of building the infrastructure to make that happen. And so internationalization could certainly be one of those things. It takes a while to hire. It takes a while to figure out how to modify product market fit for a new market. And so starting that learning curve early is helpful. You know, my personal view is if you've raised a big Series B, it's because you've grown your top line pretty rapidly. Inevitably, that comes with organizational debt in customer success. And if I had to pick a sort of generic answer for the first place to scale up after the B round, it's in that customer success function. So that when those great new contracts come up for renewal, you're in a position to first make them successful and then get them to renew or size up.
Have you seen any failures there? Like kind of like a company who has underinvested in customer success and then recreated that later?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that's a common mistake because a lot of the time founders and teams are really focusing on getting the first customers. And at the early days of the company, there is not a separate customer success team. So kind of the salespeople are in charge of selling and then upselling. There's no difference. And a lot of the time, these people, they are more hunters who like to get new business, and they don't pay attention to the existing business because they take it for granted. And sometimes it doesn't play very well. So I think it is, I mean, the churn can be 20, 30% of your business. So if you keep that business, you can grow 20, 30% higher. So if I ask you as a founder, how much would you be ready to invest to grow 30% faster this year? You give me a pretty sizable amount. I mean, this amount, you should invest it in customer success. And typically, companies tend to do that a bit later than they should.
I think also that the SaaS model is predicated on keeping your customers for a reasonable amount of time. You know, it costs a lot to acquire a customer, but you make that investment because you believe that you're going to retain that customer for multiple years. So if you're not doing that, then the whole kind of SaaS model starts to fall to pieces, really. So yeah, so make sure you retain your customer.
So you'd prefer me to double the size of the like customer success team rather than double the size of the sales team?
No, you should do both.
That's right. Is there any too much? Like continuing that question about doing both, can we invest too much, like grow the team too much and then regret it? It looks like it happens quite often that companies have to downscale, like a year later or 2 years later having raised because they went too far too soon. Is there any warning? Is there any lessons there in your experience with your portfolio companies?
Yeah, I mean, my experience, like when you, I mean, your role as a founder is you need to go as fast as you can. I mean, that's what we are all here for. The good thing about SaaS is that you have a lot of metrics that you can check as you go fast. Just imagine you're in your car, you're in Tesla, you're driving 200 miles per hour, and you want to make sure that you check all the different quadrants and make sure that all the indicators are green. As long as this happens, I think you're fine. But usually what happens is people are so much focused on growth that they don't pay attention to the indicators. Some of them are starting to turn into the red. That means the company starts to spend a lot of money inefficiently. And then usually at the same time, the growth will slow down. And then you realize, oh, damn, I have a problem because now I'm not slowing. I'm not growing that fast. I have a big cost base. So what do I need to do? Well, I need to cut, and it's a riff, and it's not a pleasant place to be. So that's why we're really focusing on is making sure as you spend the money that all the indicators stays green.
Do you see it coming? Like as investors, I mean, the entrepreneurs, they're like so focused on their business, so maybe they may miss a few things that you have seen elsewhere. Is that where basically the VC, the board, can really help?
I wish I had this conversation less often, but the most common version of this conversation is, but we grew 120% last quarter. That's great. On a cohort basis, what was your renewal? I don't know. On a blended basis across the business, we only lost 10% of our dollars. Sure, but if you're growing at north of 100%, you have this wonderful denominator effect where your churn will, across your business, always look very low because most of your business is brand new. And by the time you start really paying attention to the renewal cohorts, it might be too late.
Is that something you would suggest to focus on, like really looking at cohorts and not blended churn?
Yes, is the short answer. But partially because it might not purely be a sales and marketing execution problem. You might have a product issue that gets lost in that cohort renewal noise, where you could essentially brute force a renewal cycle by staffing up a customer success team. But in reality, the value you sold a customer on isn't translating, and perhaps you need to turn a few dials in your product configuration or your use cases that you're selling towards to get a healthier, fundamental customer value.
I think there's a couple of warning signs of expanding too fast. One is staff attrition, and one is a reduction in sales productivity. So I think if you're hiring too fast, generally people start leaving on the other side because they weren't, whether you want them to leave or whether they decide it's not the right company for them. But I think that staff attrition can be really, really expensive. You've then got to go out to the expense of making another hire, getting them up to speed and the training and everything else. And I think also sales productivity is such a key indicator for any SaaS business, particularly as you start adding more and more heads to the sales team across different markets. You may not maintain quite the same levels of sales productivity, but you don't want to fall much below where the productivity levels are. So I think they're two real warning signs for me, where if they both start to really show through, then I think that maybe you are expanding too quickly, or you just don't have the right controls in place.
Right controls, right. Okay.
If I could jump on the talent point, hugely important point. If you're hiring great people on the way in, and I think all founders believe that you're hiring the best talent you can find, and they choose to leave, there's a tendency to have revisionist history. Oh, they weren't a good fit anyway. Because you don't want to listen to the warning signs. You're running so fast, you want to make sure that you stay focused. But there might actually be real data there, and taking the moment of introspection to figure out if it's truly involuntary or regrettable loss is pretty important.
Yeah, which I think actually doing an exit interview and having a set format for how you do an exit interview, and actually keeping that data and actually trying to understand any themes or anything you can kind of pull out across that data, I think is important to do.
Keeping your calm, keeping the focus on the right metrics, the right things, not getting too enthusiastic. Getting back on people, at that stage, Series A, Series B, of course, we've got some market fit, it's growing fast, but probably not everything is in place yet. Is there any key roles, key functions that we should look at, like the key leader? Is that in customer success, in sales, marketing, operations? Are there key people that you need at that stage?
Well, I would say that it really depends on the company and the founding team and what are the specific skills of the founding team. So I don't think you can say, well, there is a general answer. But I will make two remarks. One, I think every company at every stage should try to make at least one hire per year of someone who is going to be a game changer in the company. So try to basically punch above your weight and try to hire someone who can really have a big impact. And if you do just one, and it seems like a small number, but it's actually hard to find that person, because when you bring that person on board, they're not a co-founder, but they are the next one after the co-founder. So that's a big decision. And the second thing is, I would say, don't overlook the CFO position. First, because there are very few founders who say, well, I want to founders and be a CFO. There are some. Sometimes you see them, in founding teams, but it's very rare. And often it's, the CFO function is seen, the finance function is seen like, okay, well, you're focused on the reporting. So as long as the reporting and the accounting is good, then everything is fine. And you realize that, when you start to grow and you start to be in the 10 million plus revenue, that's when you really need someone who goes beyond it. And going beyond is someone who, one example is as you grow, one thing which is very important is predictability. And a good CFO is the owner of the predictability in the business. So if you see a public company missing the number, they don't fire the head of sales. They fire the CFO, right? Because the CFO is a person who is talking to the street and saying, we're going to do X. And if it's X minus 0.5, that's a big deal. And you want that person on board. We want that person who is going to sit with the head of sales, be able to challenge, understand the pipeline, and be able to basically give to the founders and to the board numbers that the company can hit regularly. And when you start to hit that predictability, I mean, that's when you really, you are a more mature business, and it makes a huge difference.
When does it happen? Like 10, 20, more?
Well, I think, recently, one of my portfolio companies, so they hired 12 months ago, the CFO of a public company. And they were just eating a 10 million gap revenue. So in run rate, they were slightly higher than that. And it's interesting because I've been telling the CFO, the CEO and founder, I say, we need to hire a CFO. He said, yeah, but no, not yet. So no, you really need. At some point, say, okay, let's do it. And then as soon as we did it, he's like, wow, that's the best thing I ever did. Yeah. You should have told me earlier.
CFO may not have been the usual suspect when you think about scaling post-Series B, but to get that, any other role that you've seen being game-changing?
I think at that 10-ish million run rate, if you're growing at a good clip, there's a set of roles that, loosely defined, take shit off the CEO's plate. And finance and FP&A is one of those roles. By the way, just to riff on that point, as you get bigger, the trade-offs in your business get more complicated, right? New geography or not new geography? What does that look like? New product or not new product? And as the founder and CEO, you just don't have time to devote the mind share to those questions. You need a analytical, sort of creative person to work with you in answering those questions. And I think somebody in the finance org can really play that role. And it kind of becomes essential as the complexity increases to have that keeper of truth. The other function that I'd sort of put in that category of taking shit off the CEO's plate would be the head of people ops. And you could argue if that's at 10 million or 15, but it's somewhere in that band. There's enough moving pieces, especially if you're a multi-geography company, where you need somebody owning everything related to that.
Yeah, I like what Philippe said about Gamechanger hires. I think that, to aim to make Gamechanger hires on a regular basis, at least every year, I think makes a lot of sense. I like to think about a Gamechanger hire as you can look at a graph and say, that's when they joined. And whatever the metric is, for sales, it would be the revenue line, but if it's the CFO, it may be the profit line or whatever, but you can actually almost see a change, an inflection point in the progress of the business when someone like that joins. So I think that that's really important. I think in terms of the wider team, when you're getting from 10 million to 100 million, I think experience comes into play a lot more. So I think in an entrepreneur, I'm sort of a bit suspicious of too much experience. So I think you can get quite entrenched in a certain way of thinking, and I like that sort of naive, fresh look in the world. But I think once you're getting into the more process-driven sort of scale phase, I think you want to hire people that have done it before, and particularly people who can have that, who understand how to manage with that wider span of control. Suddenly, it's not just one location, it's not even just one country, and they're used to dealing with that kind of span of control. I think it can be very difficult for people who haven't done it before.
Does that mean replacing the early team? How often, basically, do you see the early teams being able to grow at the pace the business needs?
I think it depends on the company, but I think sometimes it does mean replacing certain members of the team. I think some can scale through, and others do struggle with that.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point. If you see some of the biggest market cap that have been created, the founder is a CEO, 15 years later. And one thing that, Ryan, the founder of Qualtrics said here yesterday morning, he was saying, it's hard when you're a founder because, you need to learn so much every year. And he has been doing this for 15 years. And he said, you know, I've been doing this for 15 years, and every year I'm still learning a ton. And that requires a lot of energy. And some people just, at some point, they don't want to do it anymore, right? So I think it really depends on, you know, on the person and their willingness. But as a fund, I think we like it when the founder, you know, of course, they have it in them and they keep all the way, because that's how you, I mean, I think the vision you have when you're the founder, the passion you have for the business, that's what makes great businesses. And you don't find that the same passion, it's hard to find it with professionally hired CEO.
Okay, just before to take the question, I'd like to go to another topic that's dear to my heart, which is the culture of the company. It feels that, I mean, common sense would mean that, you know, because you hire more people that are not as entrepreneur-minded as the first few employees, like things change. I kind of hope that we can definitely control our culture and really be very decide about what we want and grow our culture. But I'm wondering what you have seen elsewhere. Did your companies have to change, have to really stop doing some things to do new things?
I mean, I think that I think culture is really, really important to the success of a company. And I don't mean something that you can put on a poster and put on the wall. I think it's, you know, how do we work? What do we believe in? Why are we here? And I think it's set from the founder, from the leadership team down. It's kind of the way that they behave, the way that they operate, I think is much more important than posters that you have up on the wall. But I think obviously to kind of retain that culture as you get into more locations and more countries, it gets more and more difficult. But I think you have to keep investing in that and investing in ways of setting the right example and articulating the culture in a way that everybody can understand across countries. Because I think that when you hire, you should hire in a way that ensures cultural alignment. So I think otherwise you've suddenly got a really fragmented organization and not everyone's pulling together on the same mission. So at Message Labs, we raised $35 million. We suddenly started hiring really rapidly, probably too rapidly. And we found that in order to hire that rapidly, we had to compromise on cultural alignment. And that was a huge mistake. Before we knew it, there was little pockets of people in the organization, you know, that were watching their clock and literally the second hand hit 5 p.m. and they were out of the door because that's what it said in their contract. And we were like, what are those people doing? And once the culture starts to fragment like that, it's actually really difficult to pull it back together again. So I think it's really important to have a cohesive organization that understands the culture is on a mission. And I think that when you hire, you don't compromise on it.
And do you see company today doing a better job than like when you created your own company?
Doing a good job?
Is it better understood today by founders, like the importance of the culture? Or is it still the same and people do their mistakes and learn from them?
I think it probably is more understood now. I think the whole idea of, you know, companies need to be able to articulate why they're here above and beyond making money. I think the buyer cares more about that than they used to, which I think, again, kind of plays into the culture of the organization. So I think it's probably become more important than it used to be.
Yeah, I think there's a very strong correlation between the performance of a company and the strengths of the culture. And for me, there are two things which are very important in terms of culture. Is one, the way the founders embodies a culture, because they are the lighthouse and every employee will turn to them and try to mimic what they're doing. So as a founder, you're kind of the guardian of this culture. And one of the benefit of having a founding team with 2 or more co-founders is that if you're a software company, it's very likely you will have to move to the US. So one of the founders has to move to the US, but then what happens to the people remaining? So if you have 2 founders, then that's great because one is staying and can keep the culture in the engineering and product team, and the other one can move to the US and make sure that the new hire are embodying this culture. So that's the first thing I would say. And the second thing is that it's very important to formalize the culture very early on. And you see a lot of my best performing companies have just define their charter, and in their office, you go there, and you have on the wall, you have the culture written on the wall. And every employee, every single day, when they walk in, they see that. And that makes a big difference, because if you see something every day, you will believe it. It works.
I'll pick up on that point. I think somewhere in the 150 to 200 employee range, the founders are no longer part of every hiring decision. There might be some token interaction, but it's not a deeply informed choice, which is pretty much the moment in time where you have to codify what your culture represents. And for a lot of founders, that's an uncomfortable act, because it feels like, hey, I'm not sure I've gotten to the point where I should be writing a book about company culture, but that's almost exactly what you should be doing. In absence of that, what often happens is unconscious biases creep into your hiring, where, let's say, a relatively recent employee, somebody who joined 6 months ago, believes they are a good cultural fit, and they now have to hire somebody. They will hire somebody who looks like them when they look at themselves in the mirror in the morning, as opposed to truly asking themselves, first principles, what is a good hire for our culture? And so they need that frame of reference, and that has to come from the founders.
That's good. That's one thing we did well. Let's switch to questions from the public. I like this one. Like we always hear people say, "Oh, companies don't do whatever early enough." That's one of the big feedback we got all of the time. What's too early? What have you seen companies do too early?
Well, I've seen companies hire too fast when their model is not working. So you look at the early image, especially on the sales. I'm talking about the sales engine, so sales and marketing resources, but especially sales. People will tend to see the metrics, see that they're not where they are, but think, well, we can see them slightly improving, so let's hire more people. And then they realize that actually doesn't help improve these metrics, but then they go down, they end up burning a lot more money. So that's one of the big mistakes. Just don't scale your engine until you actually have an engine that is really humming.
Any other mistakes you've seen?
I'd say anytime you raise a new round of capital, there's, especially in this valuation environment, there's often a desire to raise at a higher valuation and make operational promises to get that valuation, which can then compound the tendency for this behavior, right? And it'll sometimes show up in loss of control on marketing program spend. Let's go to every show, let's invest a lot in our brand, et cetera, which, for a mid-stage company, you really do need accountability, what programs are working, what's not, and let's test before we ramp up.
But that would be before funding, to find the funding, or that would be a misuse of the funds once you have them?
It often shows up as misuse of funds immediately afterwards, because you're not, as a founder, confident that you can hit the plan you raised on, and you do unnatural acts to kind of hit that trajectory early in the relationship.
I think it touches on some of the points that these guys have made, but I think hiring salespeople, for me, a sales manager always wants to have more salespeople. I think it's, it's more span of control and more power and everything else. But I like to see a sales team where the existing members of the sales team are at full productivity, or maybe even maxed out beyond full productivity, and that the marketing department, the marketing team, is able to supply a proportionate number of leads into that sales team to ensure that their productivity is optimized. So all too often, you've got a sales team where some of the reps are performing well, some of the reps are not performing so well, but you add more and more people into that, and actually you can start to deliver pretty much the same number with a much, much higher cost base, and at the same time you're actually dropping the level of performance which is kind of expected within the team. So I like to really see a team, marketing and sales team, really maxed out and understand what it is that's enabling them to perform like that, with all the kind of training, materials and everything else, before you then start hiring into that team.
All right. Just have 30 seconds, so we're going to be super fast on the last question. Any key metric you are looking at for Series C? Like, well, you're all metric-driven guys.
Yeah, I mean, I would just encourage you to go to my LinkedIn page, because we just published a benchmark on how long does it take to go from 0 to 1 million ARR and 1 to 10 million ARR, and how much money you should raise to get there. And I would say, look at this curve. I mean, I think if you're on this curve, I think you will have no problem raising your Series C.
One quick heuristic, if you can add $1 million of new ARR per quarter, something is repeatable in your sales and marketing motion, and so that's a good benchmark.
I think also just looking at profitability, at Series C onwards, companies should probably be profitable, close to profitability, and understand what its margins are, and is very much kind of focused on that more than you are in the in the earlier growth stage.
Awesome. Thank you very much. It was a very good advice. I'll try to learn from it.